You know the drill. It's performance review time, which means your inbox is full of questions managers should already know the answers to, employees are polishing their self-reflections, and somehow you're the one holding it all together, child. This is People Person, the show by an HR queen for HR pros. I'm your host, Kate from HR, and today we're digging into how to run a performance review that actually works. My guest today is Barbra Gago, the CEO and founder of Pando. Hola, Barbara. How are we doing today?
Hola, I'm doing great. How are you?
Fantastic. I'm so glad that you're here. And honestly, I cannot wait to get the conversation going. Let me know if you're ready, because I am down.
I'm ready.
Perfect. So honestly, just because I am nosy, hence why I'm pursuing HR. But I want to know from you, what was your very first performance review like? Was it memorable, traumatic, hilarious? What was the vibe of that?
Strangely enough, I feel like I haven't had very many performance reviews myself. I think it's common that many individuals go through their entire career either not even having performance reviews or those conversations. It's probably why I'm in the business of helping companies do this now. I think there's been a lot of learnings I've had as a manager. My first performance review, I guess, officially was giving a performance review, not getting one. So that's interesting.
Yeah, definitely didn't see that one coming. So thank you for that answer, honestly. I can't wait to hear what Barbara has to say. But as an HR leader myself, I can admit to having the quote unquote compliance nightmare. You know, the one where you swore you checked off every box, but somehow all of it was wrong. Ugh. Well, instead of letting that keep you up at night, let me tell you about Equifax. They help you handle your compliance so you can keep your cool and stay out of the hot seat. Equifax helps you to build a smarter, more efficient, and more people-centric HR operation, ready for today's challenges and tomorrow's opportunities. With built-in security, regulatory expertise, and a platform designed around your workflows, you get more than compliance. You get confidence. So why lose any more sleep? Check out Equifax.com/HRBrew today. That's Equifax.com/HRBrew. So with that being said, let's get into the origin story of how this all began. And I have a feeling it has to do a little bit about the icebreaker answer you gave me just a few minutes or moments ago. So what gap in HR or performance management made you launch Pando to even begin with?
Yeah, so I think, I spent my career as a CMO in hyper-growth tech companies, and a lot of that is performance oriented. Of course, if you're in marketing or sales, you're really focused on driving the business. And one thing that was really clear to me within these organizations was the lack of clarity and transparency that was available to individuals around what we were actually trying to do. It didn't feel very systematic. We got really good at hiring and recruiting. So I was the CMO at Greenhouse before joining a company called Miro and then founding Pando. And I noticed that, like at Greenhouse, we really operationalized the recruiting process and made it feel almost like a sales and marketing funnel, which resonated very much with me. And then I had the insight that, we kind of hired people and then threw them over the fence. And at some point, we're like, okay, we're going to evaluate your performance now. And no one ever really knew what they were supposed to be evaluated on, if they were even doing the right stuff half the time. So I think that at a high level, the things that have been missing are just very basic, clear foundations. What are the levels? What are the expectations of different levels? Career frameworks, performance frameworks. And then I would say more recently and a little bit more advanced is getting to a more continuous calibration. So in sales and marketing, you don't wait till the end of the year to review your results. You do that throughout the year, and you do it in as much iteration as possible so that you can tweak your behaviors, tweak your programs, tweak all of the things that will get you better results as you go. And I think the last thing that's been missing is really employee-centric design. I think that's something that is coming and has been growing in popularity, which is basically for HR leaders thinking about the programs that they're designing more like products and building things that are more employee centric and focused on what is the value that you're creating for employees, not just the end user employee who's doing the review, but also the manager and the executives. Like, what is the process actually doing for everybody instead of, the fact that we've just had to do it or we've always been doing it.
Yeah, and that's been the narrative about performance reviews for probably like the beginning of time, where it's just a checkbox, like, oh, here we go. We got to go through this process again. And as HR people, we may know what the value is, obviously, because we're seeing it from a holistic standpoint. But then what makes a performance review worth it is if we can have those who are participating in it outside of people ops understand, like, no, really take the time to do it. You can see the value, not just for your team if you're a manager, but for your own individual career growth. And so I just think with that in mind, it just makes the process more robust, engaging, and honestly, feels like it's more worth it than anything else.
Indeed. I think it's so for so long it's been a chore and just this laborious thing that has to be done, and it's more of a checkbox than a value add. And I think that's something that's hopefully changing and something we're trying to change, and definitely something that HR teams are looking to do.
That's amazing. And so for HR leaders introducing performance reviews in a company, maybe it's their very first time. They haven't done it before for whatever reason. We listen and we don't judge. But for whatever that reason is, what would you say is a common first misstep about rolling out a performance review within an organization that you have found in your experience?
I mean, I think a misstep would be just jumping in and doing it the way that, some executive or CEO says to do it because that's how they did it before. I think it's always important. I mean, coming from the marketing side, coming from thinking about your buyers and personas, it's always important to start with the why, as we just mentioned, like what is the value that it's actually creating for folks in the organization. So rather than just jumping into here's the review, here's the form, here's the questions, what are we actually trying to do? Because within this organization, it could be very different. What's the purpose of this review? Is it for development? Is it for promotions? Is it to understand pay or performance alignment? I think thinking like a product manager is a way to avoid some common pitfalls of just going blindly into the process from what a very influential or strong manager at the company might advise to do, and really kind of survey the organization, understand from the stakeholders what the challenges are, what's really the core, how does that align with your culture, and not building the foundations before jumping in, I think, is one of the biggest mistakes. So, for example, having clarity around leveling
Hmm.
as a very base step one. If you're a level 4 at this company, these are the expectations. This really helps to support more pre-calibration. So rather than spending all of this time after a performance review to calibrate whether or not managers assess people correctly, the more that you can do of that stuff up front, the faster the process will be, the more aligned everyone will be, and the less work you have to do at the end to double double check everybody's work, basically.
Yeah. And so, from a timing perspective, is this something I should do 2 weeks ahead of a performance review as an HR leader? Is it 2 months ahead of a performance review, for an example that you gave of job leveling to explain? Like, as a product manager, AKA HR person, what would you think the sweet spot is?
I mean, of course, it depends on the size of your company. If you've never done one, I'm assuming that you're probably on the smaller side, the smaller scale, just because most large organizations, for compliance reasons, get into doing them. I think that from a steps perspective, you don't have to overthink these things. I do think it's important to introduce leveling framework. There's a lot of tools available now to help with that. And just in terms of training folks on it, the sooner you can implement it, the better. When I started Pando, for example, the first person I hired, we already had a leveling framework designed because I wanted to make sure that everyone I was hiring was getting hired in at the right level. And so that there was already this clarity when they joined, and then we could continue with that as they grew at the company. So I think the sooner you can do it, the better. But if you're planning a performance review and you want to introduce levels, then giving some time for people to get acclimated with it would be good. And also probably setting the expectation that, hey, we're introducing this. It's a living, breathing thing. So is the organization, it's going to grow, it's going to evolve, but we want to be able to level set everybody. So here's the levels, and maybe having a little lightweight feedback or development conversations, anchoring people in that before you do a full review. uh, if you're only doing annual reviews, the more time you can give people with clarity around the expectations, the better.
I agree. And that also then speaks to the conversation about performance reviews and performance management. I think that sometimes we can kind of get caught up in the review, the literal tactical cycle of a performance review for an employee, but it's really part of the larger conversation of performance management. Having leveling ahead of a review cycle gives managers, give employees the language to speak about how they feel like they're progressing in their career. There's alignment because what I may think is meeting expectations, it may be different than my manager, and we're thinking we're saying the same thing, and come to find out, we're not. And you don't realize it till you have the performance review. So the leveling is a perfect example of that. Would
Of
you agree,
course.
or,
Yeah. I mean, I think leveling in my mind is definitely table stakes when it comes to performance management, performance development. I think that waiting till the end of the year is essentially losing a huge opportunity to what I like to kind of frame as compounding employee impact. If you're not giving structured, frequent, transparent, iterative, documented feedback performance loops, essentially, like that continuous calibration. If that's not happening, then you're losing this opportunity to compound the impact of employees, because now you're only doing it on a 12-month cycle instead of maybe every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks. Um, so definitely important to get it in front of people as soon as possible, and also have it integrated into the process as much as possible.
so with that being said, what is something that you wish more HR leaders would bear in mind when it comes to performance management within an organization, whether it's rolling things out, utilizing tools, or et cetera? Are there things that we just typically miss the mark on that you're just like, I just wish more people knew about this with performance management? It would make your life easier, obviously, aside from Pando being the obvious solution. But just from your seat, what have you seen in your past experience that you just want to shout it from the mountaintops today?
I mean, I think as much as possible, if we can flip the paradigm of performance management from something that's backward looking to something that's more forward looking. So, a lot of times we don't do the work of defining the levels and being clear about those, and defining competencies for roles and how those map to levels. And if you're a level 4, this is what communication looks like, versus if you're a level 5, 6, or 7. We don't do that work because it feels hard, or it feels like it will be stale soon, or employees are just going to use this as check boxes, and as soon as they do that, they're going to want a promotion. And I think that's a big misconception, because most of the time, what we find is that when employees have that clarity, they are much more realistic about their current abilities and how they're doing and how they're performing. If you don't give it to them, they're like, well, of course I'm performing. I'm amazing. I'm doing everything I should be doing. But if you give them a clear rubric, it's like, oh, okay, well, here are some things I know I'm knocking out of the park. And these other things are like not my best areas, but I'm doing pretty good. So they're more realistic about how they think about their own performance, because they actually have dimensions to measure themselves on, instead of just the one, performance rating, for example. So I think that the more we can position it as, you're coming in at this level, these are the expectations for you in this level, this is your role, these are the different opportunities you have either to level up in that specific role or maybe into parallel roles later, whatever it is. And these are the steps you can take. Giving people clarity around that is the easiest path, I think, to getting the most people at your organization performing the best. And I think as a CEO, what I'm looking for in performance management is really the performance development. Like, how do I get everybody doing peak performance or performing their best. And I think that's kind of the mark that we miss sometimes.
No, I completely agree. And it actually calls to a conversation I feel that I'm getting a lot more as I speak to other, colleagues in the HR field and just people in general. The different generations that exist within a workforce and the different expectations when it comes to like what they're looking for their job performance, work-life balance, and et cetera. Having all that information unites everyone on the same playing field of like, yes, you may want to be promoted in 2.5 business days. Not saying it's a certain generation, but I think we can all assume who it may be. But having competencies, having leveling, having these conversations surround you in the ecosystem of your work can then allow the manager and the direct report to be on the same page. Like, again, it's like you're forward looking, exactly like you said. And it's not like when you're arriving at the point of a performance review at the end of the year or mid-year, whatever the setup is, that's when you're getting a surprise because you assumed you were at a certain place or your understanding of expectations and timing is a little bit different than, what mainstream may think.
Exactly. I think what you said too about alignment is something that we find is directly correlated with high performance.
Mm,
So if your goal with performance development, performance management is to drive a high performance culture, alignment between managers and reports is one of the biggest levers that you have to achieve that high performance. And that starts with a lot of the elements that we discussed to lay the foundation for that clarity. But we found the more that you leverage these tools, the more aligned employees and managers become, and you see the direct performance correlation with that.
absolutely. Now, look, we talked about forward looking, and I had to. It's impossible to have a conversation without the thing that's in the future, but technically, right now, it's two letters. I'm sure you can guess what it is. AI. So I have a question about AI and how it kind of all works in the world of performance management and performance review. Honestly, Barbara, what role do you think AI or data analytics will play in the next 5 years when it comes to performance reviews? And do you think it's super prevalent now, even?
I definitely think there's applications now. I think there's a couple of kind of key areas that AI will really facilitate us and sort of unlock things for us. So the first is automating some of the administration and administrative burden that mostly on the people team HR has to help support these conversations. So, it's a very long, laborious process, a lot of steps. You have to spend 3 months doing it. So I think just being able to inject these moments into the day-to-day work is getting more and more easy with AI. I think the second is we talked about continuous calibration between employees and managers within your organization. I think there's also this sort of continuous integrated insights that we will have the capacity now to connect the dots between qualitative conversations that are happening with employees and their managers and the quantitative data that you see in systems like Salesforce, or if your engineering team is using Jira or project management systems, where we can start to pull data from there about work that's actually happening, and then combine that with what are people saying? Are they blocked? Are they not blocked? Are they supported? Do they need things? Do they not need things? Do they have what they need? Do they feel like they're performing? Are they aligned, et cetera? And sort of connecting the dots and having those insights much more easily available to us. And then I think really augmenting human judgment, not replacing it. I'm uh, very specific in how we're thinking about integrating AI, especially into these kinds of systems. There's a lot of caution that we need to take, especially when it comes to bias and subjectivity that already exists. So a lot of the stuff that we talked about, levels, competencies, transparency, structure, those are all things that we need even without AI. And if you don't have them, I think that will make the problem a lot worse. But our goal is definitely to augment and make humans better at the stuff that we're supposed to be doing. So enabling managers more effectively with insights, nudges, things like that. In Pando, for example, when you want to give feedback, you can leverage an AI feedback coach. So instead of having the AI write the feedback for a manager and give it to an employee, for example, it will ask you questions and draw out and help you sort of think through the feedback that you're trying to give. So we want AI to shape us in a way that we want to be shaped as much as we're shaping it. So I think augmenting, not replacing, is something that we're definitely focused on, and I think that's more and more going to be the case in
That's
the
so
coming years.
cool. That's so cool. So it's coaching, not doing, or at least that's the idea behind it.
Yes,
Perfect. So we should not
indeed.
be afraid necessarily, because you can probably imagine some folks are just unsure of like, is it replacing us? Are we going to allow it to take over? How much of information or how much information should we be giving into AI, or should we steer clear from platforms that use it? But to your point, it can be really just a supplement, not the sole thing that's in place to put things together when it comes to reviews, as an example.
Yeah, I mean, just like, why are you doing performance reviews? Why are you using AI? And I think having a process, having an approach, having a perspective on it is going to be really important for organizations, not just in performance management, but across the board. We're seeing a lot of CEO mandates out publicly, like everybody has to use AI, or their performance is going to be measured on how they're using AI, and that's fine. But do they also have? Is there also clarity around why are they using it and what the expectations are for employees in terms of how that's going to shape their future at the organization? Because I think some companies will have an aligned approach with their employees and some won't. And people also need to be able to make choices about if they're good with that or not.
Yeah, I'm sensing a theme here, and that is clarity and communication. That's all anyone could
Indeed.
possibly ask for, whether it's in AI, whether it's in the things that you are measuring and evaluating a performance on. Be clear. People, be clear. Because think about it, wouldn't you want to have the information to then make your own decision to exercise your free will in the workplace? So that makes total sense. And I have to agree with that, Barbara. Just let the people know, and from there, they can decide which direction they'd like to go through in business, which then in turn affects them personally. So I can't certainly be mad at that. And so when it comes to approaching performance reviews for hybrid or remote employees, do you feel that there is a difference in how HR should treat it? Yes or no?
I think that we haven't been doing it well, no matter what the format is. I
Okay.
think, yeah, like we've pretty much sucked at doing it. And in like co-located groups of employees always have had more opportunities. That's a problem, especially before remote was as prolific as it is. There would be, a handful of maybe engineers or certain roles that didn't work in the office that always had this problem of not being able to advance in their career or feeling like they couldn't because they weren't there. So I think that a lot of the stuff that we've discussed today already are the foundations that would make remote or hybrid work better. And if you have any hybrid workers, you should just build and design a program that would be good for hybrid anyway or remote. When I was the CMO at Miro, for example, we most of the organization was actually co-located, and there were maybe 10% of the employees at the time that were not co-located, and we deliberately made the choice to communicate and host meetings and do all the things as if we were fully remote, because it impacted that 10% so much. So I think from a performance perspective, the more on demand and bottoms up you can make systems. I think we talked about that employee centricity in the beginning of this conversation, and that's something that's been missing. And the more that you can make these tools a service to employees that are make it on demand and more hands-on, make it something that can be more bottoms up, this will align very well with remote or hybrid cultures, but it also just makes the system a lot more fair and consistent.
Okay, that makes total sense. And honestly, since you feel, and heck, I can't say I disagree all too much, so that's probably why we're here today. But since we have a sense that performance reviews in general have been handled terribly, it's trash, it sucks, basura, if you will, then let's do something where we can teach the people how we can fix feedback. So if you're down for it, I'd love to play a little game, honestly. Fix that feedback, whereas HR people, we can listen in on typical manager feedback that's given in real time, and how you, Barbara, with your recommendation, professionalism, and expertise, would recommend to make the feedback a whole lot better. What do you think? You down for it?
Let's try.
All right, let's try. Good attitude. 5 out of 5. Okay, let's get into it. Now, the first feedback that we need to fix, you're too quiet in meetings, end quote.
Okay, so I think one of the things that we always recommend, and something that we even have baked into Pando, is leveraging there's a lot of different tools you can use, but we use SBI, which is situation, behavior, and impact. So in that feedback, you're saying what the behavior is and sort of what the situation is, but you're not saying what the impact is. So what I would recommend is that the manager change the feedback to something that's maybe a bit more contextual. In this specific meeting with so and so and so and so and so and so, you were quiet, and it was a topic that you're an expert in or should have context on, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, the impact of that is that the people don't trust the recommendation that we're putting forward because you didn't make your explanation or whatever it is. So right there, we're basically saying you're quiet and this is a bad thing, it sounds like, but you're not really explaining why there's an impact. And it's also then going to make the person just feel like, okay, they're blamed about something without actually being constructive. And so, yeah, situation, behavior, impact is an easy way to resolve that.
I love that. And with AI, that could be something that's coached or suggested with putting that feedback together, right?
Indeed.
All right. Well, how would they handle this one? Because this is a frequent flyer saying that should not really be said, but I'm sure anyone who's in HR has seen this before, whether it's through interviewing or a review. You're just not a cultural fit.
Okay. Well, so saying to someone that they're not a cultural fit is obviously kind of going to put them on the defense because they're being personally impacted by that. So you're automatically like, okay, I'm not a cultural fit. I basically have no future here if I'm not a cultural fit. It's like a very definitive approach to giving feedback. This is where values within kind of performance frameworks can come into play. So depending on what your culture is, and hopefully there's some definition around it, because the manager in this case probably also needs to be coached on cultural fit for how you give feedback to individuals.
Just saying.
But yeah, I think what we've seen pretty often is that companies are adding values into their rubrics where you're giving feedback around a specific value, which is also defined. So it's very clear what the explanation is. That obviously is very loaded feedback that you don't like. What is the culture that you're exactly talking about? So having specific values to anchor managers who are giving feedback in specifically would be a way to solve for that. So if it's maybe they're not being a team player, or maybe they're not challenging somebody directly, whatever the actual thing is.
Makes sense. And what if we have a manager who is the opposite and they're super chill and they're just like, oh, I'm having a grand old time. And the feedback that they're giving to their direct report is, oh, no, you're doing great. Just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. So I think that's something that we find happens very frequently in the absence of levels, in the absence of competencies, especially from managers as well as peer feedback, because it's like the employee probably asks the manager, hey, how am I doing? And they're like, oh yeah, you're doing great. So the coaching for the employee would be give a specific request probably before you do the thing to the manager so that they're aware that you want feedback on that. So for example, instead of just saying how I'm doing or I want feedback, hey, I'm going to be giving this presentation to this set of people next week. Can you watch me? I'm looking for feedback on communication and uh, business acumen or executive presence or whatever. So then the employee in this case is giving the manager some direction and guidance. And for a manager, I think an easy way to respond to an open-ended question instead of just saying you're doing great is to use frameworks like start, stop, continue, where you can just say, hey, like this is one thing you can start doing, this is one thing you can stop doing, and this is one thing you can continue doing. So if you have a structure that you're always sort of responding to feedback to, then when you're asked, instead of just like, yeah, you're doing great, you can by default just sit and reflect and use a tool like start, stop, continue to give a bit more actionable feedback.
I love that. That is great. And honestly, feel free to rip off of this episode with all the tips and tricks that Barbra just gave, because honestly, those are perfect templates to give as you're rolling out performance reviews within your company, whether it's through one-on-ones, performance review, mid-years, or just performance management in general. You cannot say you left here today the same way you came in. And so, Barbra, I am so thankful that you took the time to chat with me today about all things reviews, all things performance, how to do it well, and if you ain't, how to get a whole lot better about it. Thank you so much for your time with that.
Of course. Thanks for having me. It was really great to see you and to chat. And anybody feel free to reach out if you have additional questions. I'm always here to jump in.
Oh, I love that. And honestly, yeah, are there any spaces on social, LinkedIn and whatnot that the good people can find you?
LinkedIn is easy.
Perfect. Well, folks, that's all that we have for you today. Thank you so much for joining us here on this episode for People Person. If you definitely want to follow up, whether it was with me, your girl, Kate from HR, or if you have follow-up questions that you'd like for us to pass along to Barbra, please feel free to send us an email at peopleperson@morningbrew.com. Once again, it's your girl, and I'm going to catch you on the next one. Work responsibly. Bye, y'all.